I'm Michael Pauley, and this is Faith in Politics. On this broadcast, we range from the soul to the state as we cultivate those virtues and explore those principles that help us live well as faithful Catholics in this great land. Well, good day, everyone. I'm happy to be doing this episode today in our Sioux Falls studio, where the master of the studio, Casey Bassett, makes everything so easy. And this is the first episode that we've recorded since Easter Sunday, and I hope that you all had a blessed weekend with your families and with your church communities as we celebrated the resurrection of our Lord. I had hoped during this show to talk about some of the hot issues that were debated in the South Dakota State Legislature earlier this year, but as often happens in political life, plans get set aside to deal with more urgent matters. And last week we had such a matter. There was a truly momentous court ruling related to abortion that came out of a federal district court in Texas. Many commentators are hailing this case as the most important court decision on abortion since Dobbs was handed down last year. And as we dig into this today, I think you'll agree that that is not an exaggeration. So the court case is called Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the United States Food and Drug Administration. If you've never heard of it, one good reason is that the decision was released late last week on Good Friday, when you quite understandably may have been focused on other things. So to help us unpack this case today, we've got a terrific guest. We are joined by Adam Schwend. Adam is the Western Regional Director of State Affairs for Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Adam is a terrific legislative and political strategist on pro-life issues, and I've had the opportunity to work with him on pro-life issues that are before the South Dakota legislature. So it's a real pleasure to have him. Adam, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. Great to be here during Easter week as we're recording this, and I remember leaving Good Friday service and my Apple Watch vibrating constantly, and we had been getting some rumblings that something might be coming down that day, and what an appropriate day for that to happen. So
yes. Yes, really remarkable. Well, you know, in my adult life, I can't think of a court decision that was so monumental, but which received so little immediate attention. And, you know, again, due to that unique timing coming out on Good Friday, that's starting to change now. But I'm guessing that a lot of folks in our listening audience still will have not heard about this decision. So just to kick us off, maybe you could give us sort of the 30,000-foot overview of this case. Who were the parties in the lawsuit? What was the central legal issue that was at stake, and how did the judge rule?
Sure. So, as you said, the plaintiff is the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. The Alliance is a group of pro-life doctors, a group of pro-life medical organizations who have been really fighting this for a long time. This isn't just one giant surprise. This has been a group. The Alliance, I think, is fairly new, but the doctors aren't, and the organizations within them are not. They've been sounding the alarm about chemical abortion for decades, really. So they, in this case, essentially argued, and we'll get into the depths of it, I'm sure, just in the 30,000-foot view, argue that the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the agency charged with making sure that medications are safe and before they hit the market, didn't follow their own rules when they were approving mifepristone, which is one of the drugs taken to procure a chemical abortion. That the FDA didn't follow their own rules. That they made it up as they went along to essentially get to a political end. Particularly for the Clinton administration and as well as the Obama and Biden administrations as well. It's important to remember that this is just an injunction. The decision that came down was an injunction. So what Judge Matthew Kaczmarek ruled was that there was a likely chance that the pro-life doctors were going to succeed on the merits of the case. and that he was going to enjoin the FDA's approval, so temporarily stop the FDA's approval of mifepristone for chemical abortion while the arguments were going forward. There still would need to be a trial. There still need to be discovery, which I quite frankly think the other side is probably the most scared of. There's still a lot to be done, but this is definitely a great first win. The FDA did appeal to the Fifth Circuit, which declared that they agreed essentially with Judge Kaczmarek's ruling, but modified it a bit, wanted to, because they had such limited time, he gave them, the FDA, essentially 7 days to appeal. And if they didn't, a stay wasn't granted within those 7 days, his ruling was going to go into effect.
Yeah.
So the Fifth Circuit said, we don't really have a whole lot of time to do this, but we're going to say that you need to go back to the original approval rules, which were approved in 2000. Those rules, as we'll talk about, I think, going on, have been edited quite substantially to the detriment of health and safety rules, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But so at that point, the FDA went to the Supreme Court, said, please, we would like you to stay this ruling. And actually, while you and I were getting ready for this conversation, Justice Alito, who is the liaison to the Fifth Circuit, gave the other side a little bit more time, stayed the ruling, the Fifth Circuit ruling, instead of till today, which is the 14th, till the 19th, to give himself and the parties a little bit more time to discuss what this needed to look like in the time being. And because there are some other court cases going along on this, that it's going to make it even more confusing. So as of right now, I think everything is as it was, but we look forward to that probably changing very soon.
Yeah. Boy, and that is just a reminder, as if we needed one, about how fast breaking these developments are, that while we were literally, getting our microphones set up here and everything, we had a Supreme Court, order come out on this case, and there will be many more to come. As you said, this case is in its infancy, but even just based upon what little has come out so far, its significance is very clear. So, one of the ironies of this case, and I'm sure you've noticed this, Adam, is that in a lot of the mainstream media coverage of the decision, Judge Kaczmarek is being portrayed as this activist judge, and the narrative kind of goes like this. Look, the abortion pill was approved by the FDA in the year 2000. So we're talking, more than 22 years ago. And now all of a sudden we have this judge saying that the FDA's approval is invalid. But the judge very patiently lays out in his ruling that the reason for this long delay is not because of some shenanigans from the court, but actually because of the FDA stonewalling in its own regulatory process. Can you just explain that to our listeners a little bit?
Sure. So I giggle a little bit. Maybe it's just the morbid sense of humor being in pro-life politics, but Judge Kaczmarek got his start in federal government as a federal prosecutor under the Obama administration. So I think we'd like to thank former President Obama for giving us this decision. So he's not just some right-wing whack job. He's been a respected jurist for quite some time. He's been in the courts, in federal government, in public service for a long time. So it's unfortunate that media, in particular, the mainstream media, is going after him like that, because what you said is absolutely true. The FDA has stonewalled this process for years. Pro-life doctors started speaking out and concern about mifepristone in the 1990s because it was already being used in Europe. And they were seeing what was happening. They were seeing the reporting that was happening in that situation. And they were saying, we cannot do this here. This is a problem. So when it was approved when mifepristone was approved in 2000, they began working through the process in 2000 of voicing their concerns formally. And then when, unfortunately, there was a death, the first death based on mifepristone, on September 10th, 2001. Now, some stuff happened the next day that made it so that this was not top-line news.
Okay.
As we can all remember what happened on September 11th, 2001.
Yes.
Terrible day. But one of the probably even more unintended consequences of that day was that the first death caused by mifepristone in an abortion was not top-line news, which I think it would have been had September 11th not occurred. So that really was a catalyst of the first citizen petition coming in 2002. Those doctors, those pro-life doctors, began that work in 2002, and a citizen petition is a way for citizens to be able to come in and essentially say the FDA got it wrong, and here's all the reasons why. And the doctors actually did what the FDA, or the pro-life doctors did what the FDA didn't do, and really tried to play by the FDA rules by saying, we're going to go through this process, we're going to go through this process, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and it took forever. They got no answer from the FDA until 2016. And had they not had that long lag from the FDA, I think this would have been addressed a few years after mifepristone was approved, and we would have actually seen what it actually does. But unfortunately, that's not what happened, because this wasn't, unfortunately, a medical or science-based decision. It was a political-based decision.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, under the rules, when there's a petition like this submitted to the FDA, my understanding is that they're required to respond to that petition within 180 days. Am I getting that correct?
I believe you're right. I'm not entirely sure that that's 100% written in stone, but I don't think it really mattered to the FDA.
Yeah.
That they just didn't care.
Yep.
And they've gone through there, and there are multiple, and we'll talk about this a little later, there's multiple directions of approval that the FDA can go. And so they were leaning, I believe, on the direction that they went that kind of shielded them from some of that, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's astonishing. I guess when you do the math, it took them over 6,000 days to respond to these petitions. So again, the point is just to underscore that, while it's understandable that some Americans who haven't been following this closely might think like, wow, this is really weird that this drug that was, has been used for 22 years, that all of a sudden you've got this judge sort of invalidating the FDA's approval. But it's not because the court's making mischief. It's because the FDA itself drug out these challenges. Basically, the judge even uses this word in his decision. He says the FDA was guilty of stonewalling. They stonewalled these objections that were being raised by these petitioners, and at least the evidence that we have seems to suggest that it wasn't based on incompetence. It was based on political factors. We'll get back to that a little later on in the discussion. But let's talk a little bit more about the medical evidence at the heart of this case. So this Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine is, as I understand it, a coalition of some organizations such as the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, Christian Medical and Dental Association, etc. And they presented evidence about some of the adverse health effects, some of them severe, that are associated with chemical abortion. It's impossible in the amount of time we have to sort of go through the whole laundry list, but maybe can you just give our listeners a little bit of a flavor about what kind of adverse health effects we're seeing from these drugs?
Well, it's difficult. It's really difficult because the United States has never collected data on abortion since Roe versus Wade.
Yeah. And
the data that we do collect, it doesn't accurately deal with the complications. In 2000, when the approval came through, they were required to anybody who had to deal with the complications. Anytime there were complications around this, severe complications is what they were called, were required to report them. And that was from 2000 to 2016. Now, here's the difficulty. You had some people who just flat out said, I'm not going to do it. That's none of their business. So the political reasons. Another group of people who just tried to get around it by telling the women who are getting the pills, if you start to hemorrhage, go to the emergency room and say you're miscarrying. I mean, we have documentation of that occurring.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be documented as an adverse effect from the abortion. It gets
correct.
reported as adverse consequences of a miscarriage. Yeah,
correct. And then we had doctors in good faith saying, okay, I'm supposed to do this reporting. But they would go on the FDA site that was created for them to do this. Remember, this is not super late into the internet, but and also government website. It was so confusing and so difficult to maneuver through. Doctors often just quit and said, I got to get to patients. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So the data is absolutely incomplete.
Yeah.
But what we see is in the data that we do go to is quite often from Scandinavian countries. And it's not because we love Scandinavian countries or the Scandinavian countries that are so special, but it's because, quite frankly, Scandinavia, for the most part, has socialized medicine. And whether you like or dislike socialized medicine, one thing we can say is good is that they keep very, very, very thorough reporting and data. So the Charlotte Lozier Institute actually had a study on this, and they said that in Finland from 1995 to 2015, I'm sorry, 1990, I got that right, 1999 to 2015, 20% of women undergoing mifepristone-induced abortions experienced adverse events, including 15.6% suffering hemorrhages, 5.9% of women requiring surgical intervention, and even 9 deaths per 100,000 abortions.
Wow.
So we're talking about some serious complications here.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to hear that, Adam, because even if we sort of, this is hard for us to do, but if we just sort of set aside any moral considerations at all and just try to, not even think about the moral significance of abortion, but at least just acknowledge that this is an elective drug you're taking for an elective procedure. What other elective, I'm talking purely elective drugs, not trying to save your life or something like this. I mean, if you're trying to save your life, you might tolerate a 20% rate of adverse consequences. But for an elective drug, that's just a shocking complication rate. And as you say, it may even be worse than that. But for sure, there's something going on here.
Right, and I think it's. You hear the other side say, "Oh, this is safer than Tylenol." Well, if you believe their own stats, sure it is. But even in the initial trials had complications around 2 to 3% of the time. In Planned Parenthood's voluntary information that they give out, they have complications 0.16% of the time.
Wow.
That is a minuscule amount of even the trial.
Wow.
That should set off massive red flags right there. You do not have that much of a difference one way or another without saying, something's wrong here.
Yeah. So getting back to the judge's decision here, he lays out a very compelling case about how the FDA ignored its own rules and procedures in its consideration of this drug. And I kind of hinted at this earlier. What isn't necessarily clear to the public is that when this kind of bad process occurs in government, there's two possible explanations for it. Well, maybe three. One would be incompetence. The second would be that there's a political agenda driving it, and I guess the third option would be both, because those two aren't mutually exclusive. But what's your take on what's driving the FDA's very unorthodox procedures with this drug? What's your take on it?
Oh, it's completely politics. Bill Clinton, in the first months of his administration, sent a memo to the FDA saying, "I want this done." And then the last months of his administration in 2000, the approval came.
Wow.
And if you take a look at how it was done, if you take a look at how the contortionist way of looking at data that they had to go and reclassifying things to be illnesses that aren't, there's just no other way to explain it than this was the FDA acting politically, with the President of the United States putting his thumb on the scale, which is quite unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, too, I mean, it's a little bit of a side note, but I think it relates into this, is that, the judge points out in his ruling that the organization that actually brought what's called the NDA, New Drug Application, it wasn't a healthcare organization or even a pharmaceutical company. It was this group called the Population Council, which is, a very, how shall we say it? Whether you agree or disagree with their agenda, it's fair to call them, a group with an ideological agenda. The judge, even in his opinion, writes about their connections with the eugenics movement, and so this is, right out of the gate, it almost seems like it's a political process, because you have this political organization that's actually the one, seeking the approval of this new drug in the United States. So
right, and it was the Population Council that created Danco, which is the drug company which manufactures mifepristone.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Which, I mean, it does not take many Wikipedia clicks to go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
To start putting, if not putting two and two together, to start saying something's not right here.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to re-look at things, and that's what this is all about, right?
Yeah.
All that the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine is doing is saying, you guys need to do this approval for this drug the way you do it any other drug, and if you can prove that it is safe and effective, then it can be approved. We don't think you can. And that the only reason that you went through the process that you did was because you can't any other way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So talking more about how the FDA has handled this, the initial approval was done in 2000. But if you look at the initial approval and sort of the conditions that were attached to it, and then you compare it to what the current procedures are that the FDA recommends for this drug, there's a lot of changes that have been made, from 2000, and all of them seem to go in the direction of removing restrictions that are designed to protect patient safety with regard to this drug. Can you talk a little bit about what some of these changes have been that the FDA has done in terms of loosening these regulations?
Sure. So in 2000, and these are the standards that the Fifth Circuit is saying that we need to go back to temporarily. We'll see what happens. But when the original decision was handed down, only certified doctors, local doctors who could do surgery for follow-ups could prescribe and prescribe isn't even the right word, could distribute these pills. You couldn't write a script, send them to the pharmacy.
The doctor had to administer it, right?
The doctor had to administer it. Here's the pill, and we're going to watch you to see if there's any adverse effects for as long as it takes. And then she'd come back for the next one, and she'd have to, usually 72 hours later, take the next pill, watch if there's any adverse effects. Everything had to be done in person with local doctors who could have any follow-up that needed to be done, any surgical follow-up for any complications. In 2016, as I mentioned, they said, well, there's just so few complications and so few reports of any problems. Of course there were, because the reporting was all messed up. It still is. They changed that certification so that a provider with prescription writing abilities could apply for certification. So they don't have to be medical doctors in terms of like your OBGYN or your general practitioner anymore. It could just be any doctor or any medical professional who could write a prescription and would make it so that that just wide open things. And they stopped collecting the health data altogether, right? Yeah. It was that they had to collect data on any complications. They took that off the book completely and said they just have to collect, just need to notate it, collect data if someone dies.
Yeah, which is,
and then
just, I mean,
that's just insane.
I know. Yeah,
and then they expanded the time frame. It was that you could use these up for 7 weeks gestation. Yeah, and they expanded that to 10 weeks.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So after, and if you know much about the actual issues around abortion physically for women, after every week gestation, complications get more and more and more likely.
Yeah, yeah.
Then in 2000.
Yeah, if I could just, I just wanted to pause for a moment there on what you said about.
There's a lot there.
I know there's so much to take in, but boy, for our listeners to just focus on the FDA saying you only need to report the adverse complications if they're fatal. So, like, imagine, let's imagine that there's a drug out there that comes with a risk of stroke in some cases. There's actually a few that come to mind. And would it make any sense for the FDA to say, well, you only need to report the occasions of stroke if it actually kills the person, but we're not interested in non-fatal strokes? What possible good medical evidence, could emerge from that?
Right.
So, yeah, we really are living in strange times. Well, we are almost out of time for our radio listening audience for this program. We are going to continue the conversation with Adam because there's so much more fascinating stuff to unpack with this court decision. And so if you'd like to hear the full conversation, we really encourage you to visit the South Dakota Catholic Conference website. That's sdcatholicconference.org. Click on podcasts and radio at the top, and you can join us for the full unabridged conversation. But until next time, live well. All right, and we are gonna, for you lucky podcast subscribers, you get to hear the whole unabridged version. So we were just talking with Adam about some of the crazy changes that the FDA made, loosening up the restrictions on this drug, and so you don't have to be a doctor to distribute the chemical abortion pill. We've eliminated the requirement for reporting adverse events that aren't fatal, and the number of required office visits was reduced. And so really what we've got here is it's a little bit of like the wild, wild west when it comes to monitoring the safety of this drug. Would you agree?
Right, absolutely. And unfortunately, I'll pull a Billy Mays here and say, wait, there's more. In 2021, the Biden administration is elected and comes into power, and using COVID as an excuse, totally eliminated the in-person part of this completely. Totally eliminated the rules, just circumvented the process, and said, you can send these pills through the mail. So It used to be you'd have to go in at least twice. Then in 2016, it just became once to get the prescription. And then in 2021, they said, well, because of COVID, we wouldn't want to hurt anyone's health. So you can get these through the mail. And then just this year, they made that permanent and totally eliminated the in-person requirements at all. And probably one of the things that most people have read about is that now instead of certifying just individuals, they're going to start certifying pharmacies, so that you can go down to your local neighborhood pharmacy, and after you get the prescription, you can pick up, a 6-pack of beer, some chips, and some abortion drugs. It's turning your neighborhood pharmacy into a Planned Parenthood. It's absolutely terrible. You've got 3 pharmacies, 3 national brick-and-mortar pharmacies that said they're going to apply, or they're in the midst of applying to be certified. That's Rite Aid, that is CVS, and that's Walgreens. No one is actually certified yet. No one is actually able to distribute these pills yet. There's been a lot of confusion. Gavin Newsom got mad because Walgreens didn't love abortion enough, so he was going to stop doing business with them. There was a lot of back and forth. The reality is, though, that at this point, April 2023, there are no pharmacies who are actually certified, but there are 3, at least of the 3 of the big ones who we know have applied to be, or are going to apply to be certified.
Wow. So, we've talked a bit about the adverse health consequences of these chemical abortions, but in the particular context of getting these drugs through the mail, it's been mentioned by some critics that this raises up a whole host of other risks for women, dealing in the area of coercion and abuse. Can you explain that a little to our listeners?
Absolutely. If you, it's documented that 64% of abortions have some level of coercion involved.
That's amazing.
Just as they are now. 64%. Now, coercion can come in different levels, obviously. Coercion could mean boyfriend says to his girlfriend, if you don't go have this abortion, I'm going to leave you. That's coercion. But it also could mean human trafficking. It also could mean threats of violence. And when a woman has to actually go in to have an abortion, it's usually just her and the abortionist, or her and the clinic professional, and they're able to just talk, right? So she's able to say, I'm being forced to do this. And then hopefully the abortionist or the or some clinic employee is then going to report the situation, right? With telemedicine being in the mix now, and pills coming through the mail, these doctors, these abortionists, don't know who else is in the room. A girl could be staring into a computer screen, and the human trafficker could be on the other side of the computer screen pointing a gun at her.
Right.
They don't know.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, and also if the pills are coming through the mail too, you don't know who's actually receiving those pills, correct?
Precisely. You don't know who's receiving those pills. You don't know when she's taking them. Like I said, it's been approved now up to 10 weeks. But let's say the woman orders them at 10 weeks. Takes maybe a week and a half to get there, because some of them are coming from out of the country, which that opens an entire different issue. What's in these pills. But say now that she's 11 and a half, 12 weeks, she puts them in her purse thinking, gosh, I don't know if I want to do this or not. So she saves them for a couple of weeks. Before you know it, she's 15 or 16 weeks along.
Yes.
And if she takes those and goes through with it, first of all, she's going to have a much, much, much higher chance of complication. And second of all, I hear the pro-abortion side saying, oh, we need abortion because of women's mental health. Just think of their mental health. Think of a woman's mental health if she's left alone to deliver her unborn child in a bathroom and being told to just flush the toilet.
Wow.
That's just unbelievable what that would do to a woman's psyche.
Yeah.
So the idea of loosening these restrictions to the level that they're trying to loosen them for political reasons. These politicians want to get up and say, well, I'm protecting women's reproductive choices, so I'm encouraging their freedom, and then they go on and talk about the economy. They're not actually talking about the real facts of what's happening.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Well, that your comments there, Adam, are just a really good segue to tackle one of the things that I find fascinating about this decision is the language that the judge uses. And I should mention that, Judge Kaczmarek has been, I think it's fair to say, raked over the coals by some of the more, progressive voices in the media for his language. So, for example, he refers to the preborn baby as the unborn human or the unborn child. He even includes a footnote on the second page of his decision explaining why this terminology is more accurate than using the word fetus. So, it's clear that, even as he's writing this, he's anticipating, people's objections and going ahead and itemizing the arguments in the footnotes. But anyway, a lot of the pro-abortion advocates have just become totally unhinged by this very honest language. And there's, I have to just highlight one other case here that is really stunning. So again, this is within the first few paragraphs of his decision. The judge is describing the abortion drug, mifepristone, and he describes it as a synthetic steroid that blocks the hormone progesterone, halts nutrition, and ultimately starves the unborn human until death, close quote. So he's talking about how the physiological or pharmacological effect, you could say, of the drug is to halt nutrition and starve the unborn human until death. And this has just sent critics off the deep end. And I just can't help but wonder if maybe I'm being overly optimistic here, but it almost seems like maybe in this post-Dobbs era, what we might be seeing here is a precedent where judges feel like they can actually write about abortion honestly. We don't have to cover up everything with euphemisms, legal issues aside. What does the drug actually do? And I just say kudos for this judge for having the courage to actually use plain English to tell people what's going on here. So anyway, just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree that Judge Kaczmarek just wrote like a person. He used language that people can understand. I always get a kick out of people who say, well, it's not a baby, it's a fetus. Well, Michael, we're Catholics. Latin is our mother tongue.
Yes.
Do we know what the word fetus means?
I think it means little one or young one.
Yes, it means baby. I also point out that fetus is not a species.
Yes.
It is so you cannot just be a fetus. You have to be a something fetus. So it is a human fetus.
Yeah.
So human baby. This. I think this is quite honestly, Michael, a larger conversation around who's controlling language, and really if you're really into philosophy,
right?
It's a super philosophical book, but I really encourage it for those folks who kind of have a mind for philosophy. Look up and pick up Alistair McIntyre's book, After Virtue.
Yes, and
one of his first chapters is talking about that if you can't change the facts, you just need to change the language.
Yes.
And that's what, unfortunately, the pro-abortion and pro-abortion friends and the abortion industry is doing. They realize that when you explain as you did, explain what this drug is and does, as the kids say, where's the lie?
Yeah.
There is no lie. So if you can't change the truth of what it is, you can just change the language to make it mean what you want it to mean.
Yeah.
I hope you're right that this is an opportunity now for judges and just individual people to start speaking plainly on some of these issues. Americans hate talking about abortion, and it's not because they don't think it's important, and it's not because they don't think that it is something that is a huge part of our society. They hate talking about it because it makes them remarkably uncomfortable.
Yes.
As it should. I'm glad it does.
Yeah.
Because if it didn't, I would lose all hope for humanity.
Yeah.
Because it's a terrible, awful, horrible thing.
Yeah.
And it makes me kind of glad that bothers them. What we don't want to do is cede the language.
Yes.
We don't want to let the other side have the language. We have to reclaim that language and say, we're going to speak in real words. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's a you problem, not a me problem.
Yeah.
So I hope you're right. I hope this is kind of a first step towards jurists actually writing in a way that reflects what these things actually do. Like I said, I've been doing this too long to be anything but too super cynical, but I hope you're right. I really do.
Yeah. Well, just, one final thought on this issue is NBC News ran a story April 10th, and the headline says it all. The headline says, Judge's abortion pill decision embraces extreme language and ideology of anti-abortion movement, comma, experts say. They always have to include that line at the end, experts say. So therefore, you can be assured that this isn't just our ideological bias. We've consulted with experts. Well, one of the experts they consulted is, and I'm probably going to mispronounce her name, but Dr. Jenny Villavicencio, a OBGYN who is identified as the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists lead for equity transformation. I have no idea what it means to be the lead for equity transformation for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, but suffice it to say that according to NBC News, she is an expert. And what she writes is that, let me see if I can find it here in the article. Quoting this doctor, the article says, plenty of pregnant women use the phrase unborn child to describe their experiences, Villavicencio said, but it, quote, certainly is not a scientific term, and it is not a term that should be used when discussing science and medicine, close quote. So, there you have it. To use the phrase "unborn child" is to be using non-medical or non-scientific language. Of course, you could make the same argument that the word "heart attack" is not a valid medical term, because of course the official medical term for that is, if I'm remembering it correctly, myocardial infarction, I think is the infraction. Infraction, yeah, and so but when doctors are just speaking, when doctors are speaking plain English and actually want to be understood by an audience that's listening to them, what term do they use? They use the term heart attack because people know what that means, and so I just find it the sort of the hubris, I guess, of people who would suggest that a judge using the term unborn child is committing a heinous crime, because that's not a proper scientific or medical term. Truly,
we get that a lot. You probably heard it with Stacey Abrams out of Georgia, that heartbeats aren't really heartbeats. They're just electronic activity. Well, that's all of us. I mean, that's what heartbeats are. So we just use the phrase heartbeat because we aren't doctors, and heartbeats are heartbeats. Yeah. Whether they are in a 10-week-old unborn child or in a 50-year-old man. They are electronic currents that are pumping blood and oxygen throughout the body. Yeah, it's the semantics are silly, and it's important that we call them out when they actually try to do this. And I encourage everybody to check out the Charlotte Loescher Institute. For every one of that's Susan B. Anthony's research arm. For every one of their experts, quote unquote, we have experts too.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, some of these medical organizations, ACOG, for example, a lot of their members they're wonderful people and wonderful doctors, super pro-life.
Yeah.
Their leadership, however, has become incredibly political, has become completely avowedly pro-abortion, not just pro-choice, pro-abortion, and it's important to remember that these medical organizations' leaderships are not their membership.
Yes.
They unfortunately are parroting, quite frankly, in some cases, eugenic language, and it's very disturbing.
Yeah.
So they're a really great dog. I think if you probably, and this is totally anecdotal, if you were to ask the members of ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, you'd probably have a pretty divided opinion on the issue of abortion. It certainly would not match with the militant extremists that have unfortunately taken over the leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and I want to just give a big shout out to that because this is a think tank that I use. I mean, I would venture to say that probably no more than 2 or 3 weeks goes by in my professional life where I don't have some reason to be going to the website of the Charlotte Lozier Institute and downloading some of the really high quality academic papers that are located there. They have a search engine that makes it real easy. You just, so if whatever issue it is that you're thinking of, whether it's, chemical abortion or parental involvement or, any aspect of the life issues, you just enter that in the search engine on the website and you just get a whole treasure trove of high quality research and data. So, Adam, can you, for our listeners, give that website? Because I should have it memorized by now, but I think because it automatically loads in my browser, I never actually think about what the words. Do you have them handy?
Sure. It's lozierinstitute.org, and Lozier is spelled Lozier.
Yeah.
So lozierinstitute.org. We just put up a new website here probably a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know if you've seen it yet, Michael, but it has made the search feature even, I think, more intuitive, easier to use. You don't have to type in myocardial infraction. Yeah. You can just type in heart attack and you're going to get something like that. But it's not just doctors, too. There are attorneys, there are political advisors, there are research scientists. It's really maybe it has to do with science, social science, or hard physical science. It really is a treasure trove, and it is used all over the world.
Awesome. All right, so yeah, if you have fumbled fingers and you can't write that down, just remember Lozier Institute, Lozier, and you can just Google that and you'll get to the right place. Well, we have been talking with Adam Schwend, the Western Regional Director for the Susan B. Anthony list. It's been a great conversation, but we are about out of time, so we're going to wrap it up for now. But just as a reminder, we've done several shows on this already, but we do have a proposal in South Dakota to try to amend our state's constitution to create a right to abortion. Many of you know there are petitions circulating for that. We have resources available to help educate you on that are at the South Dakota Catholic Conference website. So that website is sdcatholicconference.org, sdcatholicconference.org, and the first thing you see there should be the information to get educated on that abortion amendment. There's a lot to learn and a lot of work that we have to do to preserve the tremendous pro-life accomplishments that we've made in this state. And I'm happy that we don't have to do it alone. We have strong allies like Adam and the rest of the team at Susan B. Anthony to help us. So Adam, thanks again for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, Michael. Always enjoy speaking with you, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being in the trenches with you again soon. So that's all we have for today, friends. And so, as I always say, until next time, live well.